try to do one more before we go. I'll try to do one more. What is this? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. It's actually very nice that it fits a board perfectly, by the way. It's perfectly. It fits a board. 16, so we need to get this one right. Okay, so this is obviously this start, so it's going to be C2 to B2, C2, B2, H5, C2, B2, H5, C2, B2, H5, H5 to A4, A4 to F4, F4, F4 to C5, C5 to H4. So it's going to be C2 to B2 to H5, H5 to A4, A4 to F3, F3, right? F3, F3 to C4, C4 to H3, C4 to H3, H3 to A2, A2 to D, A2 to D, A2 to D4, D4 to C1, C1 to B1, B1 to B1 to A3, B1 to A3, A3 to F4, A3 to F4, 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 F4 to E2, 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 C3. So it's going to be C2, C3, C2, C3, and I lost it. C2, C3, H5, C2, C3, H5, A4, C2, C2, B2, H5, H5 to A4, A4 to F3, F3 to C4? Yeah, F3 to C4, F3 to C4 to H3, F3, C4, H3, H3 to A2. This one I'm struggling. I'm struggling with this one. Why is it not combined with notation? What do you mean? Yeah. No, we might put this on just because I'll try one. Let's try one more time. So it's going to be C2 to B2, B2 to H5, C2, B2, H5, A4, A4 to F3, F3 to F3 to C4, C4 to H3, H3 to A2, A2, A2 to D4, A2, D4, A2, D4, C1, B1. C1, B1, C1, B1, and then A3. C1, B1, A3, F5, F4. Okay, so it's going to be C2, B2, C2, B2, H5, A4, A4 to F3, F3 to C4, C4 to H3, H3 to A2, A2 to D4, D4 to C1 to B1, C1 to B1, C1, B1, A3, and then it's going to be F4. It's going to be F4. F4, 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 E2, F4, E2, F4, E2, D, F4, E2, C3. Yeah, I got it. Okay, so it's going to be C2 to B2, C2, B2, H5 to A4, A4 to F3, right? A4 to F3, F3 to C4 to H3 to A2 to D4 to C1 to B1 to whatever that is. C1, B1, C1, B1, A3, and then F4. C1, B1, A3, F4, F4, E2, D3, F4, E2, D3. Yeah, I got it. I think so. It's so it's C2 to B2 to H5 to A4 to F3 to C4 to H3 to A2 to D4 to C1 to B1 to A3 to F4 to E2 to C3. Okay, so it's going to be I just lost it. So it's going to be C2 to B2, C2, B2, C2, B2 to H5 to A4, H5 to A4, and now I just lost the whole thing. H5 to A4, A4 to F3 to C4 to H3, 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 C4, H3, C4, H3, C4, H3 to A2, 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 C4 to H4, F3 to A2, 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 A2. Is it A2 to D4 to C? Is it A2 to D4? A2 to D4 to C1 to B1 to A3, A2 to D4. I think it's D4, C1, B1, A3. I think it's D4 to C1 to B1 to A3, A3 to A3 to F4 to E2 to C3. There we go. Enough, you guys. Enough. Okay, enough. We got to 17. I'm special. Okay, there we go.